one for me. So Scarborough was an insistent character. And the Scarborough girls in the house. So Scarborough was very much a character of the novel. I grew up there. I grew up there during my formative years, so it very much shaped who I am. And so Scarborough was definitely an inspiration. The other thing is when Miramar came, and as she developed as a character, I found my inspiration in all the silent, quiet girls of color that I was one of. And I felt very much these girls who have been dismissed as not being smart enough, not being pretty enough, not being anything enough. I knew that they were very much enough, and that there was lots going on in their interior world. And some days they grow up and kick ass, so that was for them.
So one of the really interesting elements in the story is the magical realism. So maybe you could describe how you use magical realism for people who haven't read the book, and also talk about why that's important to you.
Most of my favorite writers write in that genre. So like Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Jeanette Winterson, Gino Diaz, Toni Morrison. And the magical elements in my novel are that these gifts happen. So the story is basically that Miramar's father dies. I'm not going to give spoilers, I promise. She has two siblings, and when he dies, they become gifted. Her brother becomes a musical prodigy, and her sister becomes a musical genius. And there's very much a merging of the fantastical and magical in what we know as the real. And I'm very interested in magical realism in that I think our lives and our narratives are very much infused in the fantastical and the magical. So it really blurs this boundary between what's real, what's imagined, the living, the dead, the past, the present, and the future. And for, I think, many writers, it's a really nice genre to make those absences present. And so for me, it just made sense. It wasn't that I planned on it, but it just made sense.
What kind of freedom did it give you as a writer?
I think maybe for me, narratives are just like that. I can kind of see my life like that anyway. And so to think of it as just being this conventional narrative just didn't make sense. So it gave me freedom to explore how superstition, how ritual, how tradition, how memory, how history is present. And that gave me a big range of how to make that possible in a narrative.
And were there any ghosts with you while you were writing this book?
I think so, because I kind of channeled part of this book, I felt. I would just be sitting alone, and as you know, writing is a lonely kind of a thing sometimes. It's a lovely lonely thing. But I would just be writing, and it would come really quickly, and it would make me laugh, as if somebody was right there telling me stories. So maybe.
Who was it?
I don't know.
Okay.
Are you here now, spirits? I don't know.
Of course she is.
Possibly, yeah.
So one of the things that I was really curious about was, I read an early draft about 2 years ago, and then I read it a couple of months ago, and so much had changed. And one of the things that you had added was the whole Kung Fu narrative. Can you talk about Kung Fu, how you decided to bring that in, why it came in, and its relation to your own life?
Okay.
There is one.
First of all, I'm not Miramar. This is not my story. It's not a biography. It's fiction. But I did take Kung Fu for a very long time when I was a child. And also when I was growing up. I mean, I was growing up in Scarborough in the 70s and 80s. There were not many representations of Chineseness. So my mom and dad, they're right there, my mom and dad. We rented a lot of Kung Fu movies, and we went down to the Golden Harvest and watched a lot of Kung Fu movies, and they became very much a way in which I saw being Chinese was powerful. And so I knew Miramar loved Kung Fu movies anyway. So it just, then again, by going back to magical realism, that it would just make sense that those worlds that she was imagining became very much part of her identity.
And my last question, so get your questions ready, all of you. What was the most challenging part to write? What grabbed you by the throat as you were trying to write it?
I was gonna say the sex scenes, but actually that was really easy. I'm really good at sex scenes, people.
Every book is going to get bought up tonight.
But for the juicy part. That was the easy part. The hard parts, I think, was writing Miramar's mom. She was kind of the embodiment of a lot of loss, a lot of the displacement from immigration, the loss of Ba. She was very much embodies all of those, and so she was a body that grieved. And I didn't want her just to be a literary device. I wanted to give her personhood, but that also required going to some painful parts, and memories for me. So I think that was most difficult.
And she is very much real and complicated.
Yes, very much so.
Great, thank you. So, does anyone have a question? Lori.
You mentioned something about being very internal. You mentioned something about being very internal when you were younger. So at what point did you realize something that?
So, should I just repeat the question? So, Carrie Ann was very internal as a young person. At what point did she realize that she kicked ass?
I think I always knew I could kick ass. But it wasn't until later that I did kick ass. That answer?
Why did you do it?
Why did I kick ass?
No, why did you decide to grasp it? Why did you decide to grasp it?
To grasp.
Yeah, to grasp that kicking ass.
It's the same with Miramar. I think all kinds of conditions make us feel diminished, right? And growing up here as a young girl, there were conditions that silenced me, and I felt silenced. I may not have presented myself as such, but at some point you have to grow and you have to make decisions. So I wouldn't say it was a decision that I'm gonna go kick ass now. Maybe like many decisions in my life that I made that I just wanted to be me, I guess. And I hope that for Miramar.
Any other questions? Bernard.
Books that influenced you, books that sort of you see in the product, things that
Yeah. So just repeat. Should I repeat? So which books influenced you?
There's so many. Like Maxine Hong Kingston's Woman Warrior is still like seminal. Like I just think everyone needs to read that. And she uses magical realism too, and it opened up something for me when I read it. Do you know Diaz's The Brief and Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde? Wondrous Woo actually is kind of a nod of respect to him in that book because, again, it was just that magic realism, the use of language mashed together. Those kind of books really speak to me.
What else? Maybe if this light can come down so we can see. Where? Oh, great, Danielle.
So I'm just wondering how the process. You're such a busy woman. You have so many things going on, and how do you compartmentalize that creative space? Like how do you do that?
So what was the process? You're such a busy woman. How do you compartmentalize that creative space?
A large part of the book was written when I was quite underemployed. I was one of those new PhDs that could find no work. We had the store. Is Napur here? So Napur's my business partner. We also own multiple organics down the street. You should buy some stuff. Just have to sneak that in here. So it was just, Hannah was just born. We had some childcare. I was at the store, but not every day. I had no other work, and I said to Andrew, I'm going to write the novel now. And Andrew is so awesome because I know life with me is sometimes not so easy because I come home and I say things like, I'm gonna open up an organic store with the poor. He's like, okay, I'm gonna write the novel now. He's like, you do that. So I had this span of time in which I really sat down and I took a course with Jenna. And I was just on it. And I think also meeting Jenna, there was just this kindredness about our relationship, and it just happened. And that was about 5 years ago. So it's been a long process. I didn't just write this yesterday. There was a lot of, I wrote it, I revised, I edited it. I finally got a publisher, so it's a long process.
Any other questions? Okay. Oh, there, thank you, yes.
So what's your favorite part of the book?
Favorite part of the book?
The sex scenes? No. They were pretty fun there. My favorite part of the book, there's so many. I think I love, you guys, none of you have read the book, so it's hard for me to tell you which part, but she meets this man named Mouse, who's just this magical.
That's my favorite part too. So
I love Mouse.
who's the inspiration for Mouse?
Mouse just came out of nowhere. Mouse really came out of nowhere. I don't know where Mouse came from. He's just this guy who's just magical. And it was funny because I was telling Karen who asked the question, we were having lunch and then we were walking around Kensington Market and I was telling Karen about this guy Mouse who appeared in the story. And then suddenly in Kensington Market where Mouse hangs out, there was graffiti that was tagged that said Mouse. And I was like, Karen, like this book is manifesting in my life in all these ways. So
Mouse is the ghost.
Mouse is the ghost.
Okay. Thank you, Carrie Ann, for answering all these questions. Have another round of applause for Carrie Ann.